The Russian army has a problem. Their soldiers keep killing themselves. Seriously, this is happening a lot. For anybody who's been following this war, you've probably noticed that every couple days a new video comes out showing a Russian soldier deliberately ending their own life. I mean, at this point, we've already seen over 110 cases of this happening, confirmed, caught on camera since the beginning of the war. Think about that. That 110 on camera are just the ones that are captured on video and that video is released publicly. It's not counting the ones that happen off camera, because the majority of the battlefield is not documented 24/7, or even the ones that are caught on video and then that's not released. So your guess is as good as mine. Does that 110 make up, 10% of total Russian soldier suicides? 50%, 90%? We have no way of knowing. Now, there's two reasons that this is happening so much in the Russian military. Hopelessness, that they're going to be left behind by their fellow soldiers, and then propaganda, that they'll face torture and death in Ukrainian captivity, and we're going to dive into both of those in detail today. Now, existing metrics aren't great for comparison here. We do have data of reported suicides in the U.S. military dating back to 1843, but I'm not sure how we compare that with the ones that have been caught on camera today, right? So we're talking about all reported suicides in the U.S. military during certain periods of conflict compared to just the ones we can see and confirm on video that's then released publicly. In turn, I'm not confident that this will even be a helpful benchmark, but I will add some of those here just for reference. So World War II, U.S. troops in World War II saw around 5 suicides per every 100,000 soldiers. That was actually higher than it was in World War I. Now, during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that number hovered around 20 soldiers that killed themselves for every 100,000 troops. But a lot of the data used in that number is tied in with including veterans as well who had returned home after their time at war. So it does get a little bit tricky using that as a comparison. Now, it's hard to dial in exactly how many Russian troops they have in Ukraine, but not long ago, the Ukrainian defense minister stated it was around 500,000. So that comes out to, using our 110 number, roughly 22 suicides per every 100,000 Russian soldiers. But again, those are only the ones that are caught on camera and released publicly. So as you'll hear in a minute, there are countless times this happens throughout the war that we never learn about. Now, the first reason that we're seeing so many Russian suicides in this war is that Russian forces feel hopeless at times that their fellow soldiers may actually rescue them. The Russians regularly throughout their media talk about how they won't abandon their own, but at this point, based off of a lot of video and picture and first-person accounts throughout this war, it's pretty clear they do. Now, the Russians are still using, to a degree, what has kind of been called meat wave tactics earlier in the war. It's not exactly like you would see in World War I, but groups of soldiers usually dismount, sometimes in lightly armored vehicles, moving across an open area of terrain, drawing fire, and trying to identify where Ukrainian positions are. And anybody asked to do one of those, exposed assaults, it's understandable how they might feel some sense of hopelessness. Now, these videos that we see of Russian soldiers out on their own, I think at times it's kind of hard for us in Western militaries to understand because that's just not how we tend to operate, like sending individuals or very small groups out on their own. We still regularly see videos and have first-person accounts from both the Russians and the Ukrainians that Russian troops are sent forward in fire team or squad-size elements. That's roughly 4 to 10 personnel at a time. They probe for Ukrainian defenses, they try to draw fire and establish some sort of area to hold on to so follow-on units can kind of move forward and leapfrog them from there. Now, if those Russian fire teams are successful, there could be reinforcements following, but if they're not, all of a sudden that unit is out there completely on their own. And if they're not killed, they're very aware that no rescue is coming anytime soon. So in the U.S., we do send out small teams like this. Now I'm talking about conventional military forces, so, remove from your mind, covert operations, special operations, things like that. But these small teams operate in tandem with larger formations. So that fire team scouting forward will still have a platoon or a company in Overwatch, maybe providing support by fire, or at the very least has additional elements ready to roll forward to bail them out if they get stuck. Now that's not how we've seen the Russians fight. So anyone who survives one of these smaller assaults will quickly find themselves cut off, alone, sometimes wounded, but definitely recognizing that nobody is coming to rescue them. They're hopeless. And this is one of the reasons that we have so much footage of Russian soldiers in exactly that situation choosing to end their own life. Now, the second one, and a big part of why there's so many Russian suicides at the front, is the propaganda, essentially scaring them about torture in captivity. We can take this straight from a Russian document that was captured early in the war titled The Russian Combat Survival Guide. And point 58 in that document is titled Being Captured is Bad, a very bad idea. They say Ukrainian warriors also arrange hell for our military prisoners of war. Behind bestial cruelty towards our captives hide the awareness of inferiority and the enemy's fear of the Russians. To humiliate a defenseless prisoner, to torture, castrate, kill for our enemies is a kind of self-affirmation. So that is kind of the message being drilled home to a lot of these Russian soldiers as they head out to fight in Ukraine. And we have first-person accounts from some Russian soldiers that tried to do this, tried to kill themselves rather than being captured. They failed, were subsequently captured, and are grateful at this point that they weren't actually able to go through with that. For example, we have Fyodor, a conscript from St. Petersburg who was captured by Ukrainian forces but tried to end his own life before they took him. And he recently told a Ukrainian journalist, and I'll link the translated video in the description below, quote, "I took out a grenade," saying to his friend that was alongside him, "Let's do it." He said they hugged each other, threw it on the ground, and said some last warm words to one another. His friend also had a leg wound. At that point, I had already realized 3 times that I was closer to death. We were afraid to surrender. We didn't know what would happen here. We were afraid that there would be long and painful torture. But considering how it is in reality now, I can only say thank you for saving my life and curing me. According to this conscript, he said he was given first aid by the Ukrainian military. They shared water and cigarettes with the prisoners and brought medicine to the wounded from other dugouts. Now, it wasn't clear in the interview what happened with that grenade, if it was a dud and didn't go off entirely, or if it did go off and only continued to wound he and his friend. But either way, right there, one of these that was captured said, "I tried to end my own life because I didn't want to deal with being tortured in Ukrainian captivity." A CNN interview with a captured Russian soldier gave another example. This was during the fighting for Bakhmut, where they interviewed a man named Anton, who said, quote, "It was silent for a while, and then the Ukrainians came back. I thought it was the end." Anton said he believed he would either be executed or brutally tortured. Quote, "I switched the rifle to single-shot mode, and I thought I would shoot myself. But I couldn't," he says, breaking into tears. He sobs silently and lights up a cigarette offered by a Ukrainian soldier. Strike. Now, one of the reasons that propaganda likely lands with the Russian soldiers is they see how Ukrainians are treated when they're captured. And we have countless examples at this point of Ukrainians returning home during some sort of prisoner exchange and then telling their story of torture, being tortured in Russian captivity. So it's no surprise that the Russians think that's exactly what would happen to them if the shoe were on the other foot. In fact, there was a recent story that just came out a couple weeks ago, an interview with Vladislav Zadorin, who spent 22 months in a Russian prison. He said that while he was there, they used tasers everywhere, inside of our mouths, on genitalia, and even in the rectum. He said some were sexually abused. They inserted objects into the rectum, and some were beaten to death. He said one of the prisoners' tongue was cut in two like a snake's. They would loosen teeth with pliers so they'd fall out over time. He added that a Russian nurse offered to cut our tendons so we couldn't escape. So with 110 documented cases of the Russians committing suicide so far in this war, that number is only going to go up. When we look at the 2 major reasons that this is happening, the hopelessness of Russian soldiers feeling like they're being abandoned on the battlefield after or during an assault, that hasn't changed. And in every offensive action we continue to see footage from, you still see that playing out with the wounded or even the not wounded but left behind and no significant rescue party moving forward to pull them back. That hopelessness continues. And of course, the second part being the propaganda. As Russia continues to warn their soldiers that anybody in Ukrainian captivity is going to face long torture and death, fewer and fewer of them will risk that actually happening. And as we continue to see in all of these documented cases over the last few months, Russian soldiers facing capture by the Ukrainians will choose to end their own life in one way or the other. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out Between the Lines. It's our reader-funded publication. It covers a wide variety of subjects from all around the world. It's linked in the description below if interested. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.